you're like me, you spend lots of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times to hunt will be. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters, and stands at the nexus of machine learning and white-tailed deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store. Use the promo code TRUTH to save some money and download it today. Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things you can actually buy that will help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This is the reason why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation, instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. Welcome to the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Spartan Forge. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 312. Today I'm joined by my buddy Arron Bleise to talk about spot and stalk success on a Michigan hammer. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hope everyone is recovering from the Thanksgiving Day food coma and maybe even recovering from seeing family, because that can also put you in a different type of coma, maybe. My holiday was pretty, it was pretty eventful. I actually got out on Thanksgiving morning, and the plan was to go do a quick hunt in the morning and then get back for dinner with the wife and the kiddo. We weren't traveling back home. We just had recently, my wife had been back home a couple times, and so we decided, I have some extra time off around the Christmas holiday, so we decided we'll just kind of stay home for Thanksgiving, and we'll make our way back for Christmas to visit everyone. Which I guess the unintended consequence of that is that I actually got an opportunity to get out and do a little bit of hunting on Thursday morning. The plan was just to go out, no real expectation of anything too crazy, if you will. To be honest, I thought probably just go out, hang out in the tree for a couple hours, and probably come home and have some dinner. But as luck would have it, my plan was, if I saw a big old nanny doe, that I was going to fill that tag. Because oftentimes I've waited to fill doe tags till late season, and then things either get in the way, other obligations start to pop up because we're outside of the core kind of hunting season, if you will, the October kind of November timeframe, and so I'm a little less apt to kind of push forward and push plans off or whatever during that time of year. My wife is very understanding through September through basically December, and so whenever we hit that late season time period, I try to be a little bit more accommodating, which means I often don't get out quite as often as I want to, and then push comes to shove and I end up not filling a doe tag at all. And so this year I was like, I'm going to do it a little earlier. Got out, and so since it was a short hunt, I was like, if nothing's really shaking and I'm not really seeing a whole lot, then if a doe gives me an opportunity, I'll take it. So as luck would have it, I saw a couple does first thing in the morning, kind of snuck in pretty quiet, and didn't see them until they were kind of through a shooting window. It was a big old mama doe, and then a younger a doe looked like she was probably a yearling, and I don't remember what time that was. It was shortly after first light, and then just kind of hanging out, sitting there, hanging out in the tree. And for whatever reason, I just kind of happened to look off to my right, because I had been snuck up on from this particular spot in the past. This is actually the same spot where I had the encounter with the shooter buck, the two shooters earlier in, I think it was like October 18th. And there's this one little spot that like they like to slip out of that kind of surprised me in the past, and so I always kind of continually keep an eye on that. And if they come out in from that direction, once they get to a certain point, they're going to pick up my ground scent. And then the way the wind works in there, the wind that I wanted was basically anything out of a north. I'm really good, but I'm giving up like basically the area that I'm kind of my access is through, which is pretty typical. But they will slip out of this little kind of like brush spot and surprised me in the past. And I had a buck do that actually last year and wasn't able to get a shot at him because by the time I knew that he was there, it was too late, and there's not a lot of cover there, and just wasn't able to get a shot opportunity. So I was just kind of keeping an eye on it, and I heard some kind of leaves crunching that didn't sound like squirrels. So I just kind of kept watching, and I saw like a doe's head kind of pop out. But it's odd because once she clears like the brush line, there's really not a whole lot between her and I didn't want to get drawn too soon because I really didn't know which way she was going to kind of move. And so she was getting closer and closer, and it's kind of the issue with that spot is by the time they get to a position where you can really take a shot or where they're going to be, they're almost too close to draw. And so luckily there was a noise in the opposite direction. I think she was somewhere between 10 and 12 yards, and she turned her head to look away from me. And when she turned her head to look away from me, I drew and put an MMT arrow in her, and she took off, and I heard her crash, and then that was that. It was a pretty sweet deal. A little longer track job than I would have liked, but had no problems finding her. I think it maybe took me, it was like 20 minutes of tracking her to find her, and the area that I was hunting, there's a swamp there, and I had to use the boat to get in and stuff like that. And the fortunate thing was there was no dragging whatsoever. She actually expired in an area that I could actually get the boat into. And so I was able to kind of like field dress her, let her there, throw all my stuff there, my bow, my pack, like everything, just let it there. And I went back and got the kayak and kind of kayaked up to the little area that she was at, and loaded her into the boat and kayaked her out. And then brought her home, and the kiddo and I got to skin it in the garage and processed her over the weekend. Did some grinding, cut out the steaks, and grinded up some burger meat. And we have a doe in the freezer for the winter, which is always a good feeling. But the plan is to actually get out a little bit here during gun season. I'll hunt with a bow like I always do during gun season, but I think I'm going to get up to that north piece. There still just hasn't been anything as I've checked cameras around here, not a whole lot. Aaron and I talk about that a little bit on this podcast, or my guest, Aaron Bleise from the Fall podcast. So there's not been a whole lot around here still, even as I've checked cameras kind of, even through rut, when you should get bucks that maybe you hadn't seen before or whatever. Just not a whole lot of sign of proof of life. So I'm going to take some swings, take some whacks during gun season with a bow, and then during late season up in the north piece. And if nothing else, just do a little bit more learning up there and put some more data in the database for future hunts up there. And I have a plan for how I'm going to attack late season, and we'll see if it works out. But with that, I want to go ahead and jump into today's show. Have a good guest. Have a cool guest for you guys today. Have my buddy Aaron Bleise on. If you don't know Aaron runs the Fall podcast. He is a Michigander. He does do some stuff in the outdoor industry, some film stuff, editing stuff, is what he does. Is what he does for a living. And what we really kind of talk about today, I've been on his show in the past, and what we kind of covered today is just in general how our seasons have gone. He's had 2 killer hunts, in October. He killed a hammer, spot and stalk style in Michigan, which is, killing a really good deer in Michigan is, equal to killing a really good deer in PA. It's not always the easiest thing to do, just even if you're hunting private or whatever it is, there's just a ton of pressure, just generally speaking. He was able to fill both of his Michigan buck tags. And the one is on a spot and stalk in Michigan on a really, really good deer, a good deer that, you would kill most anywhere. And it's a really cool story how that all kind of played out. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's show. And as always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have on my brother, my podcasting brethren, Mr. Aaron Bleise. What's going on, man? How are you?
Good, man. How are you?
Good, man. I should have said my podcasting brother that hosts the Fall podcast. That's more appropriate to make sure people know who you are and what you do. But what's going on, man? How you been?
Good, dude. Good. We're in November, latter part of November, coming up on Thanksgiving right now. But I'll tell you, man, I feel like I want to be hunting, like, and I can hunt. Like I filled my buck tags this year, but I could travel anywhere I'd want. But I'm kind of in that mode right now where I want to like build some brownie points for next fall, and which is a huge deal because next fall I have my biggest bucket list whitetail hunt I've ever dreamed about ever since I was a little kid. I actually booked it, and I'm going to do it Saskatchewan whitetail next year with a bow in November. So like that's going to take up a bulk of my November. So I'm like, okay, let's just hang out, do the family thing, and hopefully build some brownie points here.
There you go, man. That's awesome, dude. That sounds like a killer hunt. What's driven you to want for that to be kind of like your bucket list whitetail hunt? Because a lot of guys would say, Iowa or something like that, right? That seems to be like the pretty standard answer for a lot of guys. The only odd one I've ever heard was actually Greg Litzinger. Chad, I think, asked him that, and he said, I think he said like Saskatchewan, but like early season, which was like a total oddball answer. But Greg likes to do stuff where he's just going to get kicked in the ding ding for 2 weeks straight. so that's kind of the rationale behind that. But what's the driving factor for Saskatchewan over anywhere else?
When I was growing up, Saturdays on ESPN were a big like hunting, like that was the hunting network back when I was 10, 11, 12, stuff like that. And so Saturday mornings, my dad and I'd wake up, he'd drink coffee, and we'd just watch whatever hunting shows around. And a lot of them were Real Tree, and I grew up watching the Primo stuff as well and the Drury's. But like every time I saw snow and these big chocolate racked deer, I was like, for some reason, it was just like it caught my attention. And it was just something where I was like, man, like they look like our deer, but they look so different in the fact of like, we don't have chocolate rack deer. I think that was like the driving force to it. It was like, man, they're so dark, antlered. And then one of my dad's friends, it was about 10 years ago, he'd go for about 5 or 6 years in a row until they got a really bad winter kill. But he'd come back every year with like this, just a big chocolate rack deer. And I'm like, man, like every time I'd see his deer, and I'm like, gosh, I just want to do that so bad. And then luckily I'm in a position to where I work for a company called Worldwide Trophy Adventures, and they have an outfitter up in Saskatchewan. That's one thing, you have to use an outfitter when you go up to Saskatchewan. So, or even I think it's in all of Canada, I think. But I was able to book, man. And actually I got to do that hunt this year, but filming my boss, I actually just got back from it. It was the 5th of November through the 11th. And dude, it was so much fun just to like kind of go through the paces. It was the coldest and coldest hunt I've ever been on in my life. But just to kind of go through the paces and see what I'm going to get into. And I'll tell you what, man, it was a lot. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to go back here. I thought it was going to be like shooting a fish in a barrel kind of deal. Like, you're in a blind here. You're sitting over an alfalfa pile. Everybody kills one. But dude, it's a lot tougher than that. Yeah. Like there's a lot more that goes into it than just sitting there in a blind over a bait pile. There really is.
Nice. And to say that it's like the coldest and hardest hunt for a guy coming from Michigan, like that's saying something. You know what I mean?
Dude, it was tough.
Yeah. Man, that's kind of cool that you got almost like a little trial run. Like, so what was the activity like? I mean, were you seeing, I don't want you to give away, the content of, what you were working on and stuff like that. But I mean, were you seeing a lot of good bucks? I mean, was it, the rut like you would expect if you were going somewhere like a Kansas or an Iowa, or was it different than that?
The best way I can describe it is that we were hunting ground that this outfitter has a concession basically that consists of 500,000 acres. So you're looking at 500,000 acres that he can hunt. It's all, It's called crown land up there, which is our public land.
Yep.
So, I mean, we were in the mornings, we were driving, 20 minutes to where we would then unload the buggy, and then we would drive another 20 to 30 minutes through the bush into just big bush country. And you don't hear anything, man. You don't hear trucks. You don't hear cars. You might hear an occasional plane, but I'm telling you what right now, Clint, like it was the coolest hunt as far as like just seeing deer do deer things unpressured.
Yeah.
I filmed of like a knockdown drag out fight.
No way.
And yeah, man. And,
Dude,
and
that's
all
awesome.
it is in all the hunting I've ever done. It's the second buck fight I've ever seen, ever like laid out. I mean, you see deer click antlers together and just kind of play. This was a Donnybrook. I mean, it was really neat to see that and snort wheezing and stuff like that. But man, there was 18 inches of snow.
Good
we were
Lord.
getting up. Yeah. And we were getting up and it was negative. It ranged from negative 16 Fahrenheit to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Like it never got higher than 5 degrees.
Man.
And we sat all day, daylight to dark for 5 days. I put in just over 55 hours in the stand. And, you know, the movement the first day was we saw 3 deer the whole day. It was like, you know, and everybody's thinking like bait pile and stuff like that. You just, you know, there's days that you just don't see deer. The second day saw deer literally all day, but we probably saw a lot of the like doubles, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my boss ended up shooting the second night a real good 150 inch 10 point chocolate rack. It was the shooter buck we were in there for. He showed up at last late the second night. And then my boss's best friend was with us as well. So I jumped in with him to film him and dude, you talk about grind mode. I mean, we were grinding out. We were seeing deer, seeing little bucks, but we just weren't seeing that mature deer. And finally at the last day at like 2:30 in the afternoon, this doe was just acting so weird. She's around us for like 40 minutes. And you have one shooting lane, obviously down to the bait. And, you know, everything's bush around you. So it's like you don't get to see a lot around you. You're just looking straight all day. And this doe is just like, you can tell. There's just something's weird. And it took 45 minutes. And I think this buck was sitting in the bush just watching her, just kind of like flanking her. Mm-hmm. And finally, he just committed and came in. And I'm like, wow. And I looked up. I was the first one to see it. And I'm like, Kevin, big deer, big deer. And he just comes out, just no neck, just looking around like, you know. And he was on her and ended up getting a shot, and it was awesome, dude. It was so cool,
dude. I mean, you mentioning just getting to watch deer do deer things. That is like one of my favorite things about, you know, going to some of these other states where, you know, for a guy like me or you that's coming from a Pennsylvania or Michigan or whatever, where you go somewhere where, you know, I'm not saying other states don't have pressure, but just where it's less, you know, just comparatively speaking, and just see deer kind of act natural. You know what I mean? Like that's, you know, not something that you get in some states. It's certainly not something you get around where I live, you know, especially after a couple weeks worth of archery season has kicked in. You know what I mean? At that point,
for sure,
you know, there's enough, you know, there's not a ton of public and there's a ton of people, you know, so if you do the math, you know, deer are seeing people by like a couple weeks into archery season. Man, so Canada is one of the places. So the company I work for actually is in Canada. That's why I work remote, because it's hard for me to commute to Toronto. But I've actually had a couple people who listen to the show that live in Canada, and because you're right, like the only way I think you can go is like either have to go with an outfitter, right? You have to go through that channel, or someone has to sponsor you and bring you over. And I want to say like. And it might not be in all the provinces. It might be in select provinces. Because I think that when they get a license, I think this is how it works. So don't anyone out there listening that's from Canada.
Send the hate mail to Clint.
Yeah, send the hate mail to me. But I think when they get a license, they have the opportunity to sponsor one other hunter. You know what I mean? I think that's how it works.
Is it kind of like a party hunt like Iowa does?
I'm not. I'm not familiar with the party hunt thing, but like they can essentially. So if I were from, let's just say Saskatchewan, or let's just say I'm for somewhere around like the Bow Zone or something like that, and I know you, and I live in Canada, it's like I can say, hey, if you want to come over, I'll sponsor you, you know, and then that gets you like your paperwork to be able to come over to get your license, get your tag, or whatever. And I think I can do that like once a year or whatever the thing is, and then you can come over and hunt untethered, essentially. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to hunt, you know, with an outfitter or private land. Or you can just basically hunt wherever you can get access to, whether it's public or whatever. It's at least how I understand it.
Well, how about you move up north and just hook a brother up then?
I know, right? I know. I would love to do that at some point. You know, just to go up and experience that or go hunt mule deer. Some world class
Yeah.
mule deer would be
For sure.
pretty insane. But man, we already kind of got a little taste of what you do for a living because you kind of started mentioning a little bit. But if you don't mind, we've already kind of jumped into the conversation, but we'll take a step back for a quick second. Since you're a first time offender on the show, if you wouldn't mind, just let people know, particularly where you're from and what you actually do for a living.
Yeah. So my name's Arron Bleise. I grew up here in Michigan. I'm in Central Michigan. A lot of people might know the University of Central Michigan, CMU.
Yeah.
It's actually where Antonio Brown went to college.
Mm-hmm.
I am literally live like 10 minutes from there, and that's where I grew up. And I don't know, man. It's just one of those things like PA, I think, rich tradition in hunting and, grew up turkey hunting and whitetail hunting. And I'm glad I grew up here doing that because honestly, I feel like, and this is not going against anybody out in the Midwest or any of those big buck states, but man, like I couldn't imagine shooting like a 130-inch buck for my first one. It actually took me a lot of years to do that,
right.
And I think that's why I look back at now, like even when I shot, or, I shot my first deer this year was like in the mid 1-teens in score wise. And like, I still value that deer a lot. Like, that deer just had me turned inside out. I'm like, oh man, like, so I still feel like I get that good value. You know what I mean?
Right. That's a good point, man, because I think, we've had such like a focus, I guess, maybe. And look, I think even people like me is part to blame for it. I'm not absolved of responsibility for it because we obsess over big deer. They captivate our mind, mature deer doing mature deer things and stuff like that. And I have to remind myself sometimes, and my good buddy Arron is actually great at this because he is just an outdoorsman through and through. And that dude, first off, he kills deer consistently on the public around here. But that guy will arrow whatever buck he sees that gets him super excited. You know what I mean? Like he'll let some deer walk, but if he sees a buck that he's just super jazzed about and he has a shot, like that deer is getting an arrow. And, I have to remind myself sometimes, that to remember to hunt like that because I do get caught up in trying to find a buck to chase. And is this the mature enough to, and sometimes it's like, man, you just need to go let some arrows rip, dude. And I'm kind of at that place right now. Like this season has been like another reminder of that for me where didn't have on camera or I guess I had an encounter with one really good deer that would have arrowed, but like it's been one of those seasons where I just didn't have a lot of targets that got me excited, that I wanted to like chase essentially. And then I just had to remind myself, I'm like, look, man, like hunt what you have. You know what I mean? Like if that's what you have, then that's what you have, then go hunt it, And so I have to just constantly kind of remind myself that. And I think that you're right. I think when you grow up in places like PA and Michigan and things like that, those deer are still really good deer for a lot of areas and are valuable, man. And so I'm glad to hear someone say that. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Long story short.
Well, and I don't even know if I answered your question about who I am and what I do, but now you got me into podcast mode where I'm like, now I just want to, because this is something that not a lot of people ask me. And some people look at me funny when, I'll go and I've been fortunate enough to kill some pretty big deer. And then I'll, 7 days later, I'll kill one that's significantly smaller and people are like head scratching. It's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, man, you just don't understand. Like that deer means a lot to me. I want to kill the biggest deer in the farm, but I want to go back to what you said about the biggest deer you have on camera that you know about. Because this year, around my farms here in Michigan, like biggest deer I had on camera was like 115 inches maybe, and that's like the top 10% of what I get every year. I mean, there's an anomaly every so often where it's like, oh, you throw a Pope and Young or a 130. But the thing is like when we go out of state, no matter where we go, we're trying, when I say we are, like you and I and whoever in our, kind of group, we're trying to kill what we think is the top 10% of that area.
Yeah.
So why does it make it any different when you come home? That's where I'm at with it.
Yeah.
You know,
That's a great point, man.
Yeah, and if you're, I have friends that are like, they won't hunt Michigan anymore because they want to kill like a 150. I'm like, okay, that is fine. I am not saying anything bad about that at all. But still, I'm just to the point where it's like, dude, I'm not gonna kill a 140 if I just don't consistently have 140s on the property. But and then their rebuttal is, well, if you kill it, then it's 100% dead. And I'm like, I understand, but you got to understand where I'm hunting as well. Me on like 4 acres of timber, I can't just hold and hope that there's going to be a 140 that's going to live there every year. Like you got to have square miles of what do they call them? Oh crap! Like when all the neighbors get together, a co-op. Like the co-ops are big in Michigan, and it's like, you got to have neighbors on the same freaking page to do that, dude. And I'm just not going to just go by the wayside and not hunt. So I still really enjoy it. So my whole thing is, wherever you're going to hunt, you're trying to kill that top 10%. Why is it any different at home? That's my whole thing.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. And to be honest, man, if I think about it, because you're making me think about it right now, actually, is I got kind of spoiled probably the past 2 years because I had that anomaly, but I had it for 2 years in a row, essentially, or actually maybe even 3 years in a row, where I had a handful of deer. When I say a handful, like anywhere from like 2 to maybe 3 or 4, that were all in that like 130 and over like class, and so on the public land that was around me. And so that's what my seasons were spent chasing, was trying to chase, some of those down. And so this year, whenever that didn't come to fruition, I was kind of like, oh man, it's a rough season. I did have an encounter, I think it was like October 18th with a really good buck. He would have probably been right around Pope, I think. It was a really weird, I couldn't 100% tell. I think I have a picture of him. He was either a funky 7 or like a funky 8, because like his left side was all kind of like palmated and like real thick bases and just kind of like a weird left side, or there was a point there that I couldn't see. And I had him bedded on on the 18th for a couple hours, and he just got up and walked away. But like his body, like when I see the picture and whenever he was walking away, like he's a big tank of a deer, like he's a mature buck, just wasn't ever going to score probably huge, just because it's just not in his nature. And I'm pretty sure I had him on camera last year too. Cause I kind of remember the funky rack. But so that was a deer that I was kind of interested in. The one thing that I did, thinking of your buddies, is like, you don't have to necessarily always leave because it'd be really easy for me to go like, hey, there's not consistently big deer or mature deer in the area that I live. And if that's what I desire to chase, then maybe I shouldn't hunt Pennsylvania. But what I did was I actually kind of looked at it a little bit differently. It was like, where relatively close to me within a reasonable amount of distance that I'd be willing to drive, is there large enough pieces of ground, public ground, that's unbroken, that would give a deer the opportunity to get away from pressure, hide, and get age on them, that has the potential to grow a mature deer. And so I kind of looked around and like said, I'm willing to drive X amount of distance, to go scout and hunt and all those things. And then, knew that I was going to have to make a commitment that was probably going to take me 3 years before I'd ever really see any like real results, like hunting results, just because I'm going to have to scout, I'm going to have to hunt. There's going to be probably 2 years of just failure before it even starts to make sense. Sure. And so I did that, and literally I've run cameras the past 2 years, and I've gotten a handful of hunts in on places, and I've seen bucks, from the tree, seen deer, and I've had, deer on camera that are in that 4, 5, and 6 year old age range, and so for me, it was like, if that's really what I want, then I either have to like say, to your point, be cool with just like going, hey, what's the top 10%, like typically on average, and get good with that, or be willing to put additional work in and go find it somewhere else, and so that's what I did,
Yeah.
But so, man, so we kind of already talked about your hunting background a little bit from Michigan, turkey hunting, deer hunting, all the things you would do in a hunting heritage state. How did you, I guess, talk to me a little bit about your hunting style? Like, would you consider yourself to be aggressive, more patient, and was it always like that, or has it evolved over time?
Man, it's it's evolved over time like crazy. You know, I got to go back and think about what year. Now I want to say it was like 2018 or 19. I really like flipped my hunting style on its head. Like I was always, the best way I can put it is I was like that guy that would, and there's nothing against this. So all hate mail, if you want to send it to me, you can send it to me. But
yeah, this hate mail you can send to him. The misunderstanding of sponsoring someone in Canada, you can send to me.
Yeah, exactly. I was the guy that like, and you got to understand too where I was as in my life. Like I didn't have kids. I was only married. I didn't have a lot of tie downs. So I had a lot of time to put into food plots and do some land management. And I did that. That was, I always thought, Lee and Tiff have great food plots to kill big deer on. Like I was like, that's what I need, So I'd put a lot of time, sweat, and money into food plots and stuff like that to only figure out that I don't kill deer on them, and I didn't hunt them right, and it was me. It was the Indian, not the arrow kind of deal,
right.
And so I was, started the podcast, and then I really started diving into these cats like the Troy Pottingers, the Greg Litzingers, and what the guys that I call like the elitist of like the mobile hunt game, the move and groove kind of guys,
right.
and so when I dove into that, it was like a whole new world for me, and I was like hodgepodge and stands to put together. I think I had a Millennium, with like hawk sticks and just like trying to like get your system, you always try to dial your system in. And, back like 11 years ago, I used to be a saddle hunter, and I bought a saddle from John Eberhart, and, I tried to do that. I didn't like it at the time, and so I got to the point where I was like, man, I started killing more deer when I spent less time in the woods, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
as weird as that sounds,
Yep.
And I really started ramping up more of my like off-season scouting, like the spring scouting. Like to me, it was, I just never thought I needed to do it, and I started ramping that up a little bit. I just dipped my toe in it, and then it got more and more as the years went on, and I started being more successful, and I'm like, man, there's something to this. So then, like in Michigan, my two main farms, one is completely ag. It is, all fields with wooded fence rows, little woodlots, and then my main, like I call the main farm or family farm, it's 219 acres, basically all timber, but about 60 acres of it's a hayfield. But it's in a mile section that's got a pile of timber. Okay, and two totally different beasts in between the two farms, and it's funny. My styles change no matter what farm I go to. In ag, I am very passive. I'm very strike while the time, like strike when I need to. I might only sit twice, but those two strikes, I'm going to kill a deer in one of those two strikes, or I'm going to have an opportunity at it. Right. I sit back from afar like crazy in ag country. I glass every morning. I glass every night. I take sits off. I got friends that are like, you should be hunting. And I'm like, well, it's not time yet. It's not right, but like the big timber stuff, I'm getting to be more aggressive. And honestly, I'm getting to the point where I'll dive in and for lack of better words, I'll F things up, because I want to get tight. Yeah. Like I'm going to try to get tight. And honestly, I still do it with a sense of urgency, but I try to do a lot of different things that I might not have done in the big woods stuff, because I feel like if I bump a deer, if I blow it up, I got more room to move. You know what I mean? I feel like in the ag stuff, if you kick the wrong leaf, that could be the end of your season. That's the way I approach it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. It's like whenever when you have the, at least in my experience, when you hunt in and around ag land, it typically has a lot more kind of structure to it to a degree, and there's, or it can run one of two ways. It can either have a lot of structure, right, and hunt bigger than it is, right, because there's a bunch of different setups, right, or it can have structure, but just not immense kind of like layers of structure. And there's a handful of setups where there's really only here and here, like as an example, right? Like
100%.
Kansas is kind of like that. And that's, where, you'll have a big CRP field and, the only bit of structure might be a draw that is 300 yards long or something like that, right? And there's really only one spot that you can really set up in the draw that makes sense to where the deer are going to want to be. Like in all that whole chunk of ground, there's one setup. You know what I mean? Or there might be two setups or whatever. But you're dealing with like, a piece that maybe is like 150 acres or whatever, you know what I mean? But there's literally like two reasonable setups other than like glassing something, spotting it and stalking it. But if you're just going for the classic, like a setup, there's probably two spots you can set up, so that totally makes sense, man, where it's like, where, in the ag kind of stuff, you're kind of laying back, and in the timber stuff, you're there's a lot more kind of ways to hide or ways to hunt that, I guess, is one way to kind of say it.
Yeah. And I also, I feel like a little bit of it is too, like you kind of got to listen to the timber and listen to the area because, the big wood stuff, you kind of have to get into to figure it out. The ag stuff, you can sit from 300-400 yards away and just kind of let it happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And honestly, I grew up a big woods kind of hunter, like with a lot of timber. I've only been hunting ag since 2016, and the ag, to me, I'll take it 10 out of 10 times over big timber. Like it is easier. I won't lie to you, but man, I really like to see deer doing deer things and making a move. Like one of my favorite things to do in ag is, I take my daughter to school a lot because my wife's a nurse and I work from home. So I'll take her to school, and if it's like, a little after 8:00, and if it's that seeking phase, man, I'll drive around the section until I find one slipping in to a timber that I can hunt. And then I'm going to go, I did a couple sits this year in early October where I got into the stand at 9 a.m. And actually it plays into my first buck that I killed this year, where historical data really played into some scenarios here. But I'll get in, dude, and I'll hunt 9 to 2. Yeah. And, and if that's what I'm given to hunt, I'm going to go for it. And dude, it hasn't worked as far as me killing yet, but encounters, wow. Like I've seen some things in some pressured areas that in the time frame shouldn't be happening. That's what like somebody told us, that the deer don't move on October 10th, mid-morning. But if you have this historical data, man, dude, it could be deadly.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite time, like my favorite time to hunt. I always say it's like it's that time of October that nobody else wants to hunt is my favorite time. Like that's like hands down. Like I would give up the rut to extend that kind of second and third week of October be longer.
I would almost agree with you.
The only reason I wouldn't want to give up the ruts because I'm usually gone somewhere like fun hunting, and that's always a fun time to go kind of like to Kansas or wherever. But I mean, I totally am picking up what you're saying, and where I've kind of experienced that again, because like where I hunt typically around here, it's just it's thick, it's nasty, you can't see any distance really at all. But like I can see that working when I think about hunting places like Kansas where you watch a lot and you just kind of I think that's one of the things even back east here, people who do hunt ag ground that can see, those observation sits. I think sometimes people use them too passively. To where, like, I almost feel like in those types of scenarios, like you need to hunt passive aggressively. It's I don't know if that even makes sense, but like you can set up doing observation and watch deer from afar, so you're not blowing something up, especially if you don't have a good wind to get into a certain spot or whatever. But you just want to be able to see, and you kind of observe them doing something. Man, if you see them do something, like get down, move, and get over where the business is. You know what I mean? And that I think is one thing that, in the East, whenever people were hunting, large ag land where they play it a little bit too passive, is that they see that thing happen and then they say, oh, okay, that buck is here or whatever. And then they sit a stand that isn't in the game there. Like they've already told you what they're doing, believe them and then take advantage of it. That's the one thing that I've kind of learned just from hunting Kansas is like when you see a deer do something, believe him.
Exactly.
He's telling you what he wants to do. Believe him, and then make your move. And I did that on this past trip, and I mean, and it put me in the game, on two different occasions. Came up empty on both, but I was within bow range of the two target animals. And it's like it's because I observed, watched. It was like this is what the deer are doing. This is where they want to be. I'm going to go there. Instead of I could have played it a lot more passively and tried to stay out of their bedroom or out of their kind of area and not been so disruptive. But I wouldn't have been near close enough to try to even attempt having a shot.
Yeah, and I want to elaborate a little bit on that too. This quote unquote invisible handbook that was invented way back in the day that said you needed to do this. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, the more that I got away from that handbook, that quote unquote handbook, the more encounters I had, the more successful I was. I'm not saying just discredit everything that everybody tells you, but what I'm saying is there's a lot more ways to skin a cat than hunting, a certain way. So there's I'm not picking on John Eberhard at all. Like, John Eberhard is a very good hunter. Like, everybody knows John. He's very kind of in your face, and he's got his way of doing things, which is great. But something I do kind of disagree with him on is killing mature bucks on a field edge without security cover. Mm-hmm. I've personally done it 3 times in Michigan, and I did it again this year twice. And I just don't believe in that. Mm-hmm. I actually both of them were bean fields. And it's just being able to pivot, I think, is good and adapt to situations. And I don't want anybody to think that and John, if you're listening to this, I'm not coming after you. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm just saying, like, find a way that works, but then adapt to your style. Like, I like to hear what John has to say in a lot of different aspects, but that's something that when I look at it, I'm like, man, I've actually done that a couple times, so I can't really get on board with that. You know what I mean? So the more you can, and I say you as whoever's listening to this, the more ways to skin a cat is the best way to do it. Like, I try to go in every year with a plan. Ryan Glitsky is the guy that I talk to about this. We've talked extensively on this. He's like, man, I got a plan. And he's like, and I said, well, what happens when that plan doesn't come together come November? And he's like, well, I got to pivot, So I try to have a plan every year, but like last year's plan coming into Michigan, I tried implementing that plan that I did last year to this year. And I'm like, I've got to pivot. Like, things are different, shit's changing. And I did. And, it ended up working. So I don't know, man. It sounds so cliche, I feel like, but the more adaptable you can be to an area or a situation, the better off you're going to be. Don't think it's black and white, cut and dry. This is what I have to do because this guy said this. Take what that guy said and just kind of morph it into what works for you is the best way I can say it.
Yeah. I've always kind of looked at it as, a lot of the, advice that you get on podcasts or YouTube channels or whatever the case is, it's really just all frameworks for how people who've found success previously. I view it that way. Now, some people present them as steadfast ways of like, this is how you get it done, how it works. I don't necessarily agree with that. But what the way I've always kind of looked at it is, this is a framework that this person has found success and they're going to believe in it, trust it because it has been successful and that's good for them. And I'll try some of the stuff that they're suggesting or that they're talking about. And if it works, great for me. I'll maybe add it to my bag of tricks. If it doesn't, then I'll move on from it and see, what happens to work for me. I used to be, just me personally, I used to be like a guy who would hunt the rut and just, I would sit in a tree all day. Like that was kind of like how I used to hunt. And now, I don't know if it's because I'm impatient or what it is, but even during the rut, like I move a lot. I just will get down if I just don't have a good feeling about where I'm at and there's no scientific reason. It can just be like, yeah, I'm not feeling it. This ain't the spot. Mm-hmm. I'll just get down and I'll move. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I'll go wherever it is that I think is the spot. And sometimes it's maybe the wind shifted a little bit, or sometimes maybe it's like I saw something. I observed something, 40 yards away or 50 yards away or whatever the case is, or maybe I saw a sign, 2 days ago, that I'm thinking about while I'm in this tree, and I'm like, I really think I need to be at that spot. Whatever the case is, I've just been, way less inclined to kind of hang on to an idea. And more often than not, it's put me in position to have, better encounters. To your point, staying adaptable has put me in a position to where it's like, the past probably 4 years, I've had the best encounters, that I've probably ever had, and consistently,
Is there a trend there for you? Like when you look back at like, okay, the consistent encounters you're having and opportunities you're having, is there any trends in like, man, this is why I'm doing that? Like maybe it's a terrain feature, maybe it's like right on doe bedding or, cover, whatever. Is there any trends in that where you could pick out and be like, man, I really need to hone in on that more?
Yeah, and actually, there was a big learning this year for it too. So answer the first part of your question, yes. It's typically always some type of big community scrape adjacent to doe bedding with hard access. That's usually like my MO, and that's why I'll hunt fewer days. But to your earlier point, they're more strategic strikes, and I'm hunting those areas less off of um, patterning specific deer and more off of patterning specific movement periods around those particular areas.
Sure.
Like, and you mentioned Glitsky, what he would say is that I have multiple things kind of coming together at those places. That's kind of what I'm looking for. And those are the things that I'm kind of, seeking out. The learning this year was that all those places, when I do all my postseason scouting or even in-season scouting, it's like I mark all the feed trees, like all the white oaks. It's like there's a bunch of red oaks that are around there and stuff too. But I primarily, and I'll know that they're in the area because they're just where there's white oaks. I typically have also red oaks, but the white oaks are just a little bit more scarce, and so I mark all of those. And this year, acorns in my spots did not drop like at all. I didn't have a single feed tree that I had marked have acorns, or if they did, they weren't any acorns of substance. They were like really weird, like super small, like almost immature acorns. It was really weird. And so my activity in those areas were just down in general. Now I did have that one good encounter, this year, mid-October, but even that spot, like the adjacent feed trees and stuff like that, were just non-existent. And so what I learned this year, which was like a huge learning for me, which means I need to kind of like pound the pavement again this off season and come up with some alternative plans, or this postseason or late season, is that those places, while they still held deer activity, it wasn't the same type of activity I wanted, and I think it was because of it's slightly dependent on the adjacent feed trees being productive, and so
Okay.
and so that was kind of like a big learning for me, because I don't have crops necessarily around me. So it's not crop rotation based. It's really cycle of white oak production based. And so that was kind of a learning for me, because every spot I went to this year that I historically for several years have had just hammer production of just deer activity, good bucks, just was non-existent. When I say non-existent, I mean, there were some places that just like there just weren't a lot of deer even like being observed or even on camera. And so whenever I kind of figured that out, it was kind of like, okay, that's I need to make an alternative plan now, because these spots here are dependent on this thing here, and when it's not right, this spot's not right. So
Yeah. So in those areas that it goes completely dormant, do you think that's food related, like you were talking, like, mash trees, or do you think it could be pressure related as well?
I don't have a great answer for that right now. I was actually talking to Litzinger a little bit about it today as I went to the barber and got a haircut today, and I was talking to Litzinger on my drive home, and because we both kind of, we compare notes a lot, just like, all of our hunting buddies do. It's like, especially if you live relatively close to each other, and we don't live next door, but, same general regional area. And, like I was saying earlier, it's like, I just haven't had like a lot of, I just haven't had decent bucks on camera. And I would go one step further and just say, I haven't had a lot of bucks on camera. Like, regardless of caliber, I haven't had a lot of bucks just in general. And he's kind of had the same thing, like, to where it's, he's like, I just haven't had, like, any real mature deer in places that I classically get mature deer every year, at least one or two. He's like, I've got nothing. He was like, and then still, I just haven't had a lot of bucks on camera just in general. And it's just kind of odd. And so I don't know if, like, they got killed last year potentially, or, or that they were just got hammered during gun season or whatever. That's like one theory. One thing that, I think it was Johnny Stewart mentioned to him when they were talking is that we had a really, hard cold snap last year in a part of the season that they typically wouldn't be expecting. And Johnny was like, those young deer, if they've never seen a real hard cold snap, during a vulnerable time of year. So, like, say like gun season, for example, he's like, deer will make mistakes when the weather changes like that and they have to go to food because the weather changes. He was like, so if that cold snap happens to a young deer who doesn't understand that, even though it's gotten cold really quick, you still can't be walking around in daylight. And I'm kind of just summarizing this, like, the bullet points quickly. They might be more vulnerable, and then getting themselves killed, as opposed to, making it another season, because that cold snap that happened abnormally happened during a time of year where they're extra vulnerable because of the hunting season being in.
Sure.
And so that was something that he's kind of mentioned. And I was like, that kind of makes some sense. I was like, I could buy that, and so, I don't know, man. I'm going to have to just kind of do some postseason scouting, run some additional cameras next year. I'm going to try to look around for dead deer, here in the postseason. I don't know if it was, if we had a little bout of EHD or what. I know Ohio got hit really hard. And not sure if we had something similar around here, just maybe not the same magnitude, but
yeah. Oh, it's interesting too. I'd be interested to see, like, how you pivot a little bit, and, if you're getting, like you said, just even getting those bucks on camera, that's a win. I mean, getting quantity of bucks as well. Yeah. And, that's a win from year to year, I think.
Yeah. And I was going into this season, dude, riding high. I was like, I had some spots really dialed in on annual data, and I was like, man, these should be fire, and then it was just like, wah, wah.
Exactly.
It was like, way to go. Fat chance, sucker. It was kind of like that was the response that I got from the deer woods. Yep. But man, so, just in talking, it sounds like, I'll just ask the question, like, do you consider yourself more of an October guy or a November guy? I think you're leaning October, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Man, gosh, I thought I was like a November guy. And honestly, what has kind of like skewed that is, the last 10 years I've filmed every fall. So I didn't hunt a lot of Novembers. Mm-hmm. But when I did hunt, that's when I had the majority of my success. Mm-hmm. And as of like recent, the last 3 years or so, like, dude, October is my jam. Like, even if I go back to like 2009, I killed my like first real, what I claimed at the time, like a real good Michigan buck. At the time, like I said, 2009, mm-hmm. and I killed him on October 18th, and I was like, this is unbelievable. He was 105 inches, killed him with my bow, and I'm like, wow. Like, at that time, I'm like, and this is what I go to, like, I'm glad I grew up in Michigan, because when I killed that deer, that was like, I look at how much work I had to put in and how much and how long it took me to kill that deer. And I was like, man, this is not easy. Like, mm-hmm. This is to kill a deer like this. And you look back and it's like, you're just trying to hope to get an opportunity to just even see a deer like that. So I killed that. And then, I always wanted to kill one on the opener October 1st, and I killed like a 120-inch buck in 2016. And then from 16, dude, like, I've October 13th twice, October 26th, October 18th again, October 21st. So like, I'm starting to get that October thing. Like, I'm starting to get the hang of it.
Yeah. So it sounds like it, man. That's what's up right there. I like that one date you mentioned, the 18th. That's my favorite date.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's so last year, encounter in this particular area, a shooter that I had on camera had been watching, and he put the sneak on me, and I kind of saw him late and didn't get an arrow off. Had him at 18 yards. That was kind of a ball buster. And then this year, October 18th, same day, same spot, and that's where I had that deer bedded for 2 hours that I watched. At
Wow.
He was bedded at 40 yards, and little tweak to the setup, I think, going forward, because deer from last year snuck up on me from the same area that deer bedded in this year. And so I think I need to make a little adjustment about 25 yards, and I should be good. But that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Like when you make an observation, like they're telling you what they're doing, believe them. So now I just need to tweak the setup. And that's a spot I'll be at every time I get the right wind between the 15th and the 18th. I'll be in that spot.
Sure.
Regardless. But man, so you killed 2 Michigan bucks this year. I want to start off with the first one. I think you killed that one on the 13th, right? If I'm
13th,
not mistaken. So up until that point, how was your season going until that particular hunt? I mean, was it like, were you seeing a lot of deer? Was the season going good, or did you have like the classic like early part of the year where you forgot your release and then you dropped something out of the tree? And like,
it was a different year because I went back to fully like saddle hunting again this year. So I was that guy out in the middle of the yard, like practicing and, in the off season and just trying to get your system dialed. And I've got a system right now that like I could do with my eyes closed. It's so dialed. I went minimalist this year, light, lean, mean, and I love it.
Nice.
So yeah, my season coming, like in the first 3 days of October, I put a ton of merit into ag in Michigan. Like if I can't get it done in the first 3 days, in the next 10 days or so, I'd say 8 to 10 days, and it kind of is dormant. It's kind of deer shifting a little bit, and crops like hell right now are my corn. Or not my corn, not my corn. The corn around me, there's still 1,200 acres of standing corn around me in November.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was kind of a factor of fighting with, and I'm hoping it's getting some deer through gun season right now. But my daughter's really taken a liking to wanting to do what dad does, and she's 5. So I set up. I've got a Amish built box blind with bow windows and everything, and I got it on a hay wagon. So I set that up, and we went hunting. I think it was on the 5th of October, I think. And we did that. And, the first 2 days of October, I saw my number 1 buck one of the days, I believe. And then I saw another shooter the second day. But like I said, man, I mean, I can only get so aggressive because it's field edge hunting. It's a ton of it's field edge. I can see them, but it's flatter than a pancake. I can watch my dog run for a day and stand on a beer can and watch him run for another, so it's,
I don't know that I've ever heard that saying before, man. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
That was
so
good.
It's flat, and, I'm laying eyes on him. I think the one night I got him to like 150 yards and just wouldn't commit. So it's just like one of those playing cat and mouse things. And, but I'll tell you, like the historical data coming into like that 10th, 11th, 12th into like the 17th of October, man, I've got a community scrape that gets hit every year at like 10 o'clock around that 10 mid-morning time frame. And the thing is like before time change, that's like a 4 or 5 hour sit in the morning. Like nobody's doing that in October. So that's just something I kind of took note of. But coming into it, man, I was seeing the bucks. They were still on camera and everything, but just nothing getting close enough because I just really couldn't make a move, Right. Oh, and I will say, I'd have to go back and look at the day. One morning, pulling out of my yard and out of my driveway, and I can hunt all the property around my house, and take my daughter to school. This was on, man, I have to go back and look at the day. But I pull out, and as I'm coming down the road, I'm like, wow, there's my number 2 shooter buck just standing there. Like in the morning, it's like, 8 o'clock in the morning, just like watching us come out of the driveway. And I'm like, crap. So then I take her to school. He's in this little 5-acre woodlot. In that historical data I talked about, I think this was around the 10th or 11th. That historical data, I knew that the last 4 or 5 years, this community scrape gets hit, and this inside corner of this bean field that mid-morning time frame. So I took her to school. I came back home. I laced up and I got in the tree and I sat for 4 hours. I sat from like 9 until 1 or something like that, or noon. And he never showed up, but I'm like, I got to do it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I had a conference call that I had to get out of the stand for. But I'm like, if I got time to hunt, I got to do it. And he just never ended up showing up. And that kind of let me into, like the day that I did kill. But yeah, that was kind of how my first couple weeks of October went. It was just kind of feeling everything out. I could still see everything. And I had everything on camera. It's just, I just couldn't make a good enough strike. I thought that was going to be the strike, but, it just ended up happening.
That, when you mentioned, if it doesn't happen in the first two, day 1 through 3, kind of at the beginning, the next kind of 7 to 10 are kind of, blah. That's a very John Eberhart thing there, right? Because John talks about that a lot. Like, the first like 1 to 3 days he'll hunt, and then outside of that, he really kind of, he'll wait later than what you do typically. From what I'm gathering, he really doesn't pick things up until he starts to hit like that pre-rut time frame is when he'll actually get back in the woods. But when you mentioned that no one's doing that long sit in the morning, you're talking to the one guy who does.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's October mornings are actually like in and around those dates that I like. That's actually my favorite time to hunt, is like the morning sits. I actually see way more, at least around me. And it probably has something to do with just the fact that like a lot of other people are willing to go out after work or whatever, around the public that I hunt and stuff like that, it gets more pressure around that time frame. And so I actually hunt more specifically mornings in October. And then whenever it gets around those dates that I really like, I usually don't hunt so much the weekends as I do. I try to take days off in the middle of the week and hunt like any day that's like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Okay.
Is usually whenever I try to do it, because there was actually a study done that showed like how deer movement picks up, how it changes through the week during the hunting season. And Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are the best movement days, typically speaking, because, people are out hunting Friday after work, all day Saturday, not Sunday in PA because you can't hunt. But if you're a state that can hunt Sunday, then of course Sunday. Deer aren't moving on Monday because they're still kind of a little bit buffered from all the pressure from the weekend. And then Tuesday it picks up, Wednesday's a little more, Thursday's a little bit more, Friday it's okay during the day, but people take Fridays off to hunt. And then certainly by Friday evening, the movement starts to decrease again because people have come in or started hunting after work. Mm-hmm. And then it dies down from like Friday through the weekend again until like Tuesday. And so just in paying attention to that, I started prioritizing like the times I want to hunt. Like mornings, because it's the coolest part of the day typically in October, and you can get some warm days. And people typically aren't in the woods those days, and then in the middle of the week because people are at work.
Yeah.
So
for sure. I want to, before you go into the next, I want to go back to what you said about John and how he hunts those first 3 days and he kind of waits too. But John, he has to travel to a lot of his ground. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and one thing that I will say that helps me around here is I've got a permission piece also that's in ag country, where being able to work from home the last 2 years has made the number one source of why I've killed, the 3 bucks that I've killed the last 2 years, because my availability, I can wake up and I can drive my section, in about 15 minutes and see just about every deer in that section. And if I go to the permission piece, it's like same kind of thing. So being able to be available and have the time to go pursue that. If I had a job where I had to go into work and stuff like that, and I was only like a weekend kind of warrior deal, I probably wouldn't be as successful. But I value that time, and I just know when I have the time to go and scout or glass for 6 or 7 minutes, I go do that, because those are what I call my high value strikes. It's like that's when my time is really valuable and I can kill a deer doing that.
Right. So this particular deer, this first buck, did you have any history with him at all?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Nope.
So is the first time you saw him whenever you saw him from the tree?
So funny thing. No. So so I had a 5-acre patch of timber, and this number 2 deer that I call the babysitter. The reason why I call the babysitter, because that day that I took my daughter to school, that night I was hoping to get a babysitter to go in there because I figured he was still in that timber and I wanted to go hunt. And so we went and glassed that night anyway, my daughter and I, and because I couldn't get a babysitter, and the deer walks out underneath the stand, hits the scrape. I filmed him do it and everything through a spotter on my phone. Man. And I'm like, no. And Peyton's like, what, Dad? And I'm like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. You know what I mean? It's just like, man, that's the stand, that's the location I was going to go to. And, so that was like the 10th or 11th or something like that. So this first buck I killed, I was able to glass that area, and I have a camera in that timber as well. He showed up on camera, and I thought it was the number 2 deer at first. I'm like the babysitter deer, and I'm like, man, so he's still in there, and I was gonna try to hunt that afternoon, and so I glassed that morning. I saw him that morning from the glass, and I'm like, okay, he's around here. Like all I got to do, and like I said, historical data with this scrape is that second week of October, these bucks hit this scrape like crazy. And I'm like, if I can get to that stand or that location, I'm good. Like I will, if I can get there without blowing him, because it's only 5 acres, and it's like, and I had a pretty good idea where he'd be bedding if he was still in there. And so I get my stuff on and going out the door, and I actually it's like 3:00. So, it gets dark before time change, like 7, a little after 7 or so. And I'm heading out there, and I look, and I'm like, he walks out of the timber, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So I ran and got my spotter, and I filmed him for like 5 minutes, and I could see he had like a double main beam, and I'm like, who is this? Like, I have no idea who this deer is. Never seen this deer before in my life. And the second week of October, I always get a random buck come through. It seems like every year I get just like they'd make the shift, and it's like they're just out kind of meandered. So I film a little bit, and then he goes back in the timber, and I'm like, okay, how am I going to get into this location now and get on this scrape to where I can hunt him that night? So I'm just him hawing, like, what do I do? So I actually drove down the road, and I went in from a different direction, and there was like a high mound of grass on the field edge, and where I could glass into the timber and just kind of see if he was on the edge or not. And if I figured if he was, I could see about 10, 15 yards into the timber. I figured if I couldn't see him in there, I was going to make my move. So, I just, hands and knees crawled it for a long way. And and I felt like Jake Bush. Like, you know what I mean? Like, right. I'm like, I'm doing this, and I'm muddier and all get out, and because it had just rained, and I know there was rain coming in later that day, and I just took my time, man, and I got to the tree. I didn't hear any deer bust. The wind, it was a decent wind day, but I had a great wind for me, and got everything set up, got in the tree, and I'm like, I'm here, and I think I'm good. Sat there for like 2 hours and didn't see a deer. Finally, I had like a little button buck come out in front of me, and the neighbors, he was kind of working over to me, and he worked right over to me and, messed with the scrape a little bit. The scrape's at 12 yards, and he gets underneath me, and he's just eating just foliage, and it's so thick in this timber where I can't, and the foliage is up, so I can't see a distance at all. And, it starts, this little button buck, he's like looking around, and I'm like, I'm just going to watch him, and he's going to tell me what's going on. And it starts raining. So I put my camera gear and everything away, and it's like downpouring, high winds, like raining. And all of a sudden, like this button buck, he kind of works off, and the sun comes out a little bit. But it's weird. It's that sun, but with it kind of raining still. Yeah. And I look back behind me in the timber at like 32 yards or something like that, and I see a leg, and I kind of like crouch down a little bit, and I can see his right beam and his double main beam, and he's at like 32 yards, and I'm like, oh my God, like he's right there. He's right on the other side of my lane. I have a cut lane there because I've been hunting this farm for, since 2016, and it's a lot of the same locations. So I can't shoot any farther. So he kind of works back off towards the south, and I'm like, crap, and this button buck comes back out, and he pushes an adult doe out in the field underneath me. And I'm like, what's going on? Like he's pushing this doe and, so then the doe's out in front of me and the button buck's behind me and she kind of gets squirrely and kind of runs back in the timber underneath me. And I'm like, something's weird here. Something's going on. And the button buck and the doe, they run off to the east and I can't see him anymore. And all of a sudden I look up and I just see a beam and I see antlers coming at me. And he's kind of like, almost like he got spooked. I don't know if the doe and the little button buck kind of horsing around spooked him a little bit.
Right.
But he kind of like comes in trot and he stops at like 18 yards. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got one window right here. He's going to be right at this scrape at 12 yards. I had to get him behind this branch. I'm in an oak tree and I knew I could go to full draw. And when he got behind that branch, he was walking. Then I went to full draw and I just kind of matted him a little bit and he stopped and I punched him and he runs in 2 bounds. He's out in the middle of a bean field. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like my initial thought was I hit him low. Like I thought I hit him a little too low. I felt like it was good, but like maybe a little low.
Right.
And so I wait for like 10 minutes and I'm like, I gotta get down. I gotta look at this arrow. The arrow, dude, oh my God. The arrow did not look good at all. Not good at all. And right when I started looking at the arrow, it starts downpouring again. And I'm like, crap. Like this is not good, And it had like fat film on it. Yeah. And the veins were like red from blood. But I'm like, this sucks. So I back out, call one of my good buddies that's got a dog. And I'm like, what are you doing today? He's like, I'll come right now. Just wait for me to get there. Long story, even longer maybe. Another one of my buddies comes out with me and we get to point of impact and the dog gets right on it. And the dog's going and 43 yards from where I shot him, he died. I actually took him right through the front shoulder and took his heart out.
Oh, wow.
So it was about an inch or so to the right of where I thought I hit him. But yeah, it was perfect. Walk right up on him. I'm like, oh my gosh,
that's crazy.
He's done, dude. And that was buck number 1.
That's awesome, man. That's dude. It's good to have buddies that have a dog, dude. How nice is that?
Oh, it's so nice because he helped me last year as well. On my buck here in Michigan, I got shot a deer and him and I tracked and he ended up finding it with the dog and it was still alive and it was a whole ordeal. But dude, I love it. I mean, shout out to Taylor. He's going to come on my podcast. We've got to do one. We just got to get hooked up and he's good. He's only been doing it for a couple years, but him and his dog Mace, they are freaking awesome.
It's awesome. I've never used a dog. I mean, not that I'm looking forward to the day that I have to.
Right.
But, I like watching dogs work just in general, and it's got to be kind of cool to watch them just kind of get on a track or on a trail and go.
It is, yeah, for sure.
Nice. So that was your first Michigan buck, and that was on the 13th of October. And then Michigan is a 2-buck state, right? That's like because it's not like an earn a buck thing, right? It's like you get 2 buck tags, right? And so you got this second Michigan buck, dude, and this thing is just a magnum. So did you know of this second deer at all? Had you ever laid eyes on him, trail camera pictures or anything?
Never, man. This is the weird thing about this. This deer, I'm still to this day trying to track down somebody that has pictures or history or anything with this deer. There's I'm trying to think here. There is a big hunt club around me that I know all those guys really well. And they've got, I wouldn't even venture to say how many acres they have. And they run like 30 cameras, if not more. And they have not one picture of this deer. I don't, like, I have cameras in, the 2 sections around where I killed them. And I glass all the time, dude. Like I would see a deer like this.
Right.
And nobody I can find. I've actually been seeking out neighbors that I've never talked to before in my life just to be like, I'm just looking for someone that, because to me, that's knowledge. It's like, okay, where's this deer been holing up for? I pulled his teeth and he's at least 3, but I think he's 4 for sure.
He looks
the body
like
was huge.
He's a big bodied deer.
Yeah. And honestly, he could be a 3-year-old, but I really don't want him to be a 3-year-old because that is like sad in a way for a deer to be that big and be a 3-year-old here in Michigan. I know it can happen, but like I'm like, man, this is what we could have if it just gets some age, you know?
Yep.
But yeah, so like I have not one history, not one picture, not one nothing of this deer.
So how did that day kind of play out? Because this was later in October, right?
This is the 21st of October.
Okay. Yeah. So it's
Yep,
still
it was
right
a
around. It's
Friday.
still right around those dates that are like, man, those are the magic dates. I'm telling you.
Yeah, exactly. So my whole plan was there was a big weekend coming up, and honestly, I hunted a couple times after the 13th after I killed that buck. But I'm not gonna lie to you, dude. Like my season was like set. Like I shot a deer. Like I'm good. I'm still gonna hunt, but I'm like that weight's lifted. You know how it is.
Yeah.
It's like that weight's lifted, and you can kind of coast.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't say coast, but
and
you
well,
can
everything
kind of
everything after that's gravy, you know. And
Yes,
and if
yes.
something comes up with the family, it's like you don't feel torn because you can't be in the timber. It's like
for sure,
100%.
Yep. So my dad's 65 and he's still into bow hunting, still shoots a vertical bow and loves to bow hunt. And he's actually kind of like getting back into bow hunting more. And I really like to see it because like he's the one that taught me how to bow hunt. And,
right.
You know, he kind of, as he got older, life happened too as well. And he kind of didn't hunt that much. And now he's kind of getting more back into it. So he doesn't hang stands. And, you know, I don't want him to hang stands, to be honest with you, because I just don't need him falling out of a tree.
Right.
And so at our family farm, and he goes, hey, we need to get a stand down by the creek. And there's a creek crossing in our family farm on the edge of a cedar swamp, and there's good doe bedding in there. And he's like, you know, do you think you could go hang a stand kind of deal? He didn't ask me like that, but he was like kind of implying it. But I'm like, yeah, I'll go hang a stand.
Yeah,
so
when your dad, whenever you pass the age of like 25 and your dad says, hey, we need one of those things over here. What he's really saying is like, hey, dude, why don't you go do this?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So the weekend I can't remember what I was doing that weekend. I forget, but I couldn't do it the weekend. I was probably working on my house, I think. And he wanted to hunt all weekend because, you know, it's his favorite time too, is that, you know, 10 days leading up to October as well. And he's like, I need another wind option. And I'm like, yep, like I'll do that. I said, I got to stand and everything. And he wants to saddle hunt, but I said, we need to learn a little bit more we need more time in the saddle and everything. So he's still in set stands, which is fine. And so I said, I got to take Peyton to school, and I'm going to leave right from school, and I'm going to head right up there, and I'm just going to hang the stand. I know what tree it's got to be in, and I'll get it done. So I leave, taking my daughter to school, and I go right up to the family farm, and I hang the stand. And actually, my buddy the night before shot a really good deer, and he was trying to get a hold of my other buddy that he didn't know to get the dog and go out and track. So as I'm hanging the stand, you know, I've got my lineman's rope around, I'm hanging sticks, and I'm trying to text both of these guys, like trying to coordinate, like, hey, this is where you can meet this guy and stuff that. And I finally get this stand hung for my dad, and I go down. I'm like, I'm going to make a mock scrape right here. It's a perfect little pinch, and just a kind of like a little bait pile in a way. You know what I mean?
Right,
you might get a deer to stop. And
just a little candy. Yeah, exactly. Somewhere to like give him a spot to like, hey, what's that smell? Gets him to stop for a second and get a shot. Yep,
exactly. So I make a mock scrape, and I'm like, you know, I should probably climb back up in that tree because my dad's probably going to want a video just to see how it looks because it's looking over a clear cut. And so I'm like, okay, I'll get back up there because I'm like, I got to get back home. I got to do some work. It was kind of a big work day for me, and I don't like going into the weekend with having, you know, loose ends not tied up.
Right.
So I'm like, I plan on going home and working the whole day. And so I get up in the stand, I take a video, I send it to him, and he's like, thank you so much, you know, and I'm leaving, and I'm like, man, I'm going back home, but I got a permission piece that's not too far from my house, and I'm like, man, I could slip back there. I wanted to move a camera on a different scrape, and because I'm just trying to gear up for like the rut, like you know, these deer are gonna start hitting the scrapes later October, and I'm like, I'm gonna go move this camera. It's gonna take me literally 10 minutes, and it's not a far drive from my house. I'm gonna do that. So as I think there are some details that happened, and you'd have to go back and listen to one of my episodes. I know I'm cutting out details, but I was fighting with myself whether I just go home or do it. So I'm like, I'm just go do this camera, go move it, and I can drive right to the camera literally and pick it up. And then I was gonna walk a little ways in, and just to not booger things. And a close family friend of mine, a farmer, and I'm going to preempt this right now. I would never have killed this deer if it wasn't for this farmer. Like I owe all the kudos to this farmer. And a family friend of mine, I pass him going to the farm on his tractor, and he's got a fertilizer spreader, and he's just going to fertilize one of the fields. And I pull into the farm, and I'm driving back, and he's calling me, and I'm like, man, he doesn't call me like all the time, you know? So I'm like, and I'm actually on the phone with another buddy, and usually I'd be like, hey, I gotta, I'm just gonna let that go and I'll get back to it. But I'm like, you know what? He doesn't call me a lot. I'm gonna answer it. So I answer it and I go, hello. He goes, hey, I just passed you. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, man, there's a pretty big deer in my field over here, and it looks like he might be hurt. And I'm like, okay, and I'm like, I'll come over there. And this family friend, he's a hunter, he's a rifle hunter, but just a farmer, he likes to hunt, but he's not really into it like we are, you know what I mean? He just likes seeing big deer, and all that stuff. And so I peel over there, and he's on the side of the road and looking out into his bean field, and he's like, he's right there. He was bedded right there. And so I get up on the tractor, and I'm on the fender of the tractor. I look out. He's like, can you see him like right down that bean row? And you can see his antlers. And I look, and the deer turns his head, and I'm like, said in my head, holy shit, who is that? You know what I mean? I'm like, wow, that's a big deer. And he goes, I think he's hurt. So the deer at that time stands up, and he does have a limp to him. Mm-hmm. And it looks like it's on the back, like somewhere in the back, he's limping, but he's getting along all right. And he's like, I think you should go out and like kill him. And I'm like, really? Like, you're okay with that? And he's like, yeah, go ahead. So I'm like, well, I had my bow with me, but I didn't have like my release or anything. I don't know why. Right. I'm like, well, let me run home real quick. And I said, will you stay here real quick and just watch him? He's like, yeah. So as I'm leaving, I look out in the field, and the deer is like, he's up and he's walking towards the fence row. And I'm like, I got to hurry up. So I go home. I literally throw my Sika Fanatic hoodie on. I've got like the Wrangler stretchy pants, and I've got my like crispy boots on. And I'm like, I guess this is what I'm rolling with. Like, right. I grab my bow, my release, and my binos, and I put my binos, and I'm like, this is all I need. And I had fingerless gloves as well. And so I get back there, and he goes, by the time I get back, he's like, he bedded down. He's still in the beans, but he's like, I can't see him. And he's like, I can't really tell you where he's at because I didn't see him bed down, but I know he's out there. I'm like, all right. He goes, you have fun. I got to go do some work, and just, let me know how it goes. I'm like, all right, sounds good. So I kind of drive up to this fence row, and it's a east-west fence row, and I'm coming in from the east. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the deer is on the north side of the fence row, and the wind is it'd be the southwest. So the wind is perfect for me. Yeah. But the problem is there's no wind at all. Like maybe 3-4 mile an hour, maybe. But it was frigid cold that morning. So like the frost is still kind of in the ground, and the ground's like wet. You know what I mean? So like the leaves aren't crunchy. So I start walking up this fence row on kind of the south side of it. And my whole plan was to try to find this deer through the fence row and make a play that way. Or maybe I could shoot him through the fence row. Well, I was sadly mistaken that was going to happen. And so I get about halfway up this fence row, and I'm starting to glass, and I'm like, it's so thick. Like I got to get on the other side. I got to get on his side. So I find like a deer trail, and I just get on my hands and knees, and I just ever so slowly just start, hands and knees, belly crawling to get on his side. And the fence row is probably 15, 20 yards wide. I finally get on his side, and I'm like, okay, I'm in this kind of like taller CRP grass where it meets the beans, and the beans are still standing.
Okay.
And so I'm like thinking in my head, okay, the wind's coming out of the southwest. If he's sitting or laying like big deer should lay, he's gonna be like probably facing me, or he should be facing northeast, and his back should be to the wind, as I'm thinking. Right. I spend like 20, 25 minutes on the glass, and I'm like, I told myself, and the biggest thing that I'm not good at stalking deer. I've tried to stalk 2 deer, and I've actually been successful at it both times. But the thing that I'm not good at is patience. Patience is the biggest thing. And I'm sure Jared Sheffer would probably tell you the same thing.
Yeah, you and me both, dude. That's my biggest hang up. It's like I screwed up more hunts like in open country by being aggressive and not patient enough. So 100%.
For sure. For sure. So I spend like 25 minutes on the glass, and finally I pick up a tine, and he was kind of like licking himself, just grooming himself. And I'm like, oh my God, he's right there. So I figured he was probably at, I don't know, 80 yards or so. And he was off of the fence row about 20 yards. So he was in the shade. There was a big like oak and maple tree right there that was just shading that part of the field. And I was like, okay. And I could see how he's laying. He was laying exactly. He was facing northeast. I was coming in from the east, but he was like, his head was on my side, if that makes sense. He would have been laying on his right side.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, shit, I really gotta, be careful here because I can't shoot him at 80 yards. Like I gotta get closer. And so I start creeping, and I soon figured out that my quiver on my bow was just a bad idea. So I took my quiver off. I knocked one arrow, and I kept an arrow in my hand, and I left the quiver. And I'm like, if I get 2 shots at this deer, oh my God. Like,
right.
If I miss the first time, then I probably don't deserve this deer. So it took me a good while. Like, it's cold. I'm muddy. Like, my hands are freezing, but I'm just like belly crawling. And then I'd make it 10 yards, and then I'd look up, and then I'd lose him. Cause like you change that angle a little bit. And
it's so hard on the ground, kind of like keeping track of them, dude. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
Yeah.
So hard. So, and I'd spend 5 minutes every time I'd stop just to like, where'd he go? And then I'd pick him up. Well, I could see every time when he turned away from me, and that's when I would like get on my feet, like almost like duck waddle or duck crawl. And that's when I'd like pick up 10 yards at a time. Like when he'd move, like I'd get up a little higher, and I would just go, get 10 yards. And then get right down. I did that a couple times, and it helped out a lot. Finally got to the point where I'm like, man, I got to be top pin club here. Like I'm tight. Like if he gets up, I feel like I'm within top pin, and my top pin's 20, 25 I can shoot. And so I figured I was at 25 yards. Like I'm glassing him, and I'm like, I'm trying to be Levi Morgan here. I'm like picking out bean rows. Like, okay. Like that bean row is this, and that next row is a certain distance from there. So like I figured 25.
Right. So
I'm sitting on my knees, and I put one of my gloves down. I put my cam on the glove, and I just clip my release, and I'm like, I just got to wait for him to get up, and I'm facing him, but I'm kind of hunched over because the beans are, they're not like Illinois beans. They're like Michigan beans, like knee high maybe.
Right.
And this deer, when I left him, when I saw him walking, I mean, he did have a limp to him, but I'm like, man, he's grooming himself. He's, scratching himself. Like this deer is alive and well. Like this deer is, he's got his wits about him. And so I'm sitting there. It took 57 minutes for him to get up. And about 4 different times he would like kind of rock in his bed. And then I would try to go to full draw, and then he wouldn't move. He was just kind of repositioned himself.
Yep.
Well, dude, that one time, how cows get out of their bed and they like kind of put their head down close to the ground, they get up. Well, you know how deer do it. So when he did that, I just went to full draw. And when he stood up, he was facing me. And I said, the whole first thing I said is, holy F, that deer's a lot closer than I thought he was. So I'm right on top of this deer. And he gets up, and I shoot a Garmin sight. So like I can hit the button, I can range him, and it says 18. And it kind of said in my head, I'm like, no way. But then I'm like, I look outside of my sight, and I'm like, no, he's 18. Like he's close.
Right.
And he's grooming himself, and he does one of those big like shakes off, like, his whole body moves. And I put it, he gives me his left shoulder. He's not like directly facing me. He's kind of quartering to me. Uh-huh. And I put it right in front of the front left shoulder, and he kind of swings his head, and he kind of like catches me. And when he catches me, I just touched it off, and I saw the arrow physically go through his whole body. Like I see my nock go off, and it comes out of his body, and I see it flying through the bean field. And I'm like, oh my God. And he peels out of there like a deer that, you know what I mean? Like, Oh God, what just happened? He's running on 4 good legs. And
right, all of a sudden he had 4 good ones.
Yes, exactly. And I've had other deer do that too. That's weird. But as he's like peeling out of there, I just had an intuition to like go to my next arrow. Like maybe I can get another shot. I knew it was a fatal hit, but I'm like, I'm going to go for the next arrow. So I grab it, and I knock it and I clip my release. And as I clip my release, I look up and he's like turning to look back at like, what the heck was that? He didn't even know he was shot, I don't think.
Right.
Like just he heard a bow go off or heard something. And he turns and I'm like, oh my God. And I went to full draw and I said to myself, if you're going to let me shoot you again, I guess I'm going to shoot you again. And he was completely broadside. I put it on him. It was 26 yards and I touched it off and I took him right through the heart.
Oh, man.
And then he just kind of peels off and just falls about 15 feet from there. And I'm like, and then I get up and I'm like, what just happened? Like, it's one of those things that like what just happened? It was like a pinch me moment. Like, huh?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And dude, I don't know. I
lost
walked
it.
up on him. I lost it. I did. I may have threw my bow. I called my wife's at work. She's trying to text me and I couldn't, the whole time I'm sitting there on this deer, like I can't respond to a text. So she's like, what's going on? You know, and she actually texted me because my wife, she's like, she asks me every morning, like how drop off go at school, like how's Peyton this morning. And I look down and I'm like, as I'm waiting for this deer to get up, I'm like, I should probably respond to her. Cause if I don't respond to her in like 10, 15 minutes, she knows like, okay, something's going on. So all I did is I took my right hand and I didn't even look at the phone and I'm like, I just typed in awesome with one hand and I looked down, I'm like, oh, that seems right. And I hit send. It was spelt way wrong, you know?
Right.
And she's like, she'll get the point.
Right.
So
right. Yeah, my classic response is just the letter K. Like that's it. It's just like,
yep.
K.
Yep. We're good.
Yep.
Yeah.
So man, you walk up on this deer and what are you thinking, dude?
He's a lot bigger than I thought he was. I knew he was big, but he's a lot bigger than what I thought he was. And immediately I went to like, what's the injury? Like, where's he? His back leg was broke at the knuckle. But it wasn't. There was no pus. There was no swelling. There was no blood. There was no. He would have lived with it. I had some buddies come and look at it as well, and they're kind of the ones that brought it up. It's like, dude, he would have lived with that thing. Like, that's nothing. That's like hardly even an injury. And I'm like, I know, but you know. And then when I caped him out, was like, maybe I'll get the real story here. And dude, like, nothing. Like, I think he got hit by a car. Yeah. Okay, I feel like he did with the leg break, but then I don't because dude, there was no bruising.
Right.
There was no like on his. All of his meat was good. Like, you know, it was weird.
Yeah, that is weird. Because that was the first thing I thought too, was like maybe he got clipped by a car, you know? But
yeah. And you know, his brows were broke off. The one brow you can count as a point. The other one is broke. You can see it's a clean break, but not any of his other tines were chipped. No, nothing. So I'm like, how does he break his brows if he gets hit by a car? Like,
right.
You know, it looks like some breaks that would happen in a fight. Honestly, it could have been a fight. I don't know if it would have been. I don't know, man. Jury's still kind of out on that.
Dude, that's a bananas hunt, dude. Like that's just crazy. The fact that the farmer, like, and you're right, like that old boy there, whoever that is, that's a good family friend right there. You know?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That's awesome. You know, like just, hey, there's a buck out there. You should probably go kill him. Like,
yeah.
Well, I think I will. Thanks. You know, it's like,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, dude.
And he knows that. I thanked him like a ton, and I'm like, I told him, I was like, this wouldn't happen if it wasn't for you, and I appreciate that. And that's one of those things, like I told you, like the availability that I can have, like,
yeah,
you know, a lot of people can't do that, like with their jobs and stuff like that. Like I value that a lot, and it's, you know, I spent the whole Friday, like, but I will tell you, I did come down to my office that night, and I worked until about 1:00 in the morning to kind of make up for. Like, that's just what it goes with it, you know?
Yep,
so
exactly, dude. What did you did you put a tape on him at all, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I did. So as is right now, he's 132 gross. Nice. But you know, that's why I want to try to find somebody who's got pictures of him, because I want to know how big his brows were. If you put 4-inch brows on him, he's at 140. You know, right. I honestly think he's a 140s type deer just because his frame and his mass. His bases were over 5 inches, you know, right. And then he carried his next mass measurements to like 4, like 3s.
Right.
Just a toad of a deer. The picture makes him probably look a little better than he is, but I'm telling you, he's a damn good deer.
Yeah, he's an awesome buck, man. Like that's a killer buck, dude. Like, dude, whenever you You and I talked because this is how long we've been trying to schedule this podcast. We were talking during what this was going on, and you sent me a picture in advance, dude, and I was super stoked for you, dude, because that's. But I didn't know the details behind the hunt, so this is the first time I'm kind of hearing it, dude, and that just makes it that much better, dude. So
yeah, but I couldn't be happier, man. It's that deer for my area around here, like. I wouldn't say it's a once in a lifetime deer, but that's a deer that, I mean, I'm 35 now and I've been hunting my whole life. I think this is my 21st season or something like that. And it took me that long to shoot a 130. Like that's my first 130 in Michigan.
Yeah. That's awesome, dude. What's your plans for the rest of the season? Are you going to lay low or are you, what are you doing?
Trying to get my wife a buck. Honestly, she's a hunter as well. So we went out the other night, rifle hunting, and I've got this deer. I nicknamed him CJ. The reason you might be able to put the dots together, but he held his velvet really long into September. I mean, almost into October, and I thought he was a doe. So I named him CJ after, Caitlyn Jenner. And nice. So I'm like, man, he'd come out in the beans. And I'm like, why is it's still like pristine velvet and like September 28th. I'm like, is this thing like and he kind of had a weird funky rack, and he's only a 6-point, but he's like 17 inches wide. And I'm like, what is like, and my wife's uncle back in the day, he shot a 115 inch 8-point that was in full velvet in November that I don't think had nuts. I think it had everything but nuts or something like that. So I'm like, maybe it's one of those kind of deals. So I nicknamed him CJ.
Nice.
And whether that's good or bad, or I don't know, but that's first
hilarious
thing in my head.
What it is.
Yeah. And so that deer steps out and he comes to 80 yards, and my daughter's with us. It's the second time she's ever come hunting. And my wife's like, I don't know if I want to shoot him. And I'm like, I'm not going to force her to, but I'm like, are you sure? Peyton's with us. Like it's snowing. It's like a beautiful snow. And I'm like, he's just eating right there. And she's like, no, I wouldn't be happy with him. I'm like, all right, your hunt, you can do you, So those are my plans, is try to get her a deer. But, right now, seems like every buck is shot with a gun already. So I don't know what's still out there.
Yeah.
So,
well, man, it's I know we've been chopping it up here for getting close to an hour and a half. I want to be sensitive to your time. But before I let you get going, buddy, why don't you let folks out there know where they can find out more about you, where they can follow along with what you have going on, and where they can find and listen to the podcast.
For sure, man. I appreciate that. Yeah. So I run a podcast called The Fall Podcast, which Clint, alluded to early in the podcast. You can find it on Spotify, iTunes, or Apple Podcasts. Anywhere you download your podcast, you can find it. Just search The Fall Podcast. I'm on IG, The Fall Podcast. Same thing with Facebook, and then a YouTube channel is The Fall Podcast on YouTube. I've got old hunts on there, and I try to film a lot of my stuff, and so there's some good hunts on there. But I'm trying to ramp up my content on YouTube as well. So coming this in 23, there'll be even more content on there. So yeah, that's where you can find me. So I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, you bet, brother. And let's do this again soon. And maybe one of these days I'll make it up to your neck of the woods.
For sure, man. Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much, Clint.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Spartan Forge, Exodus, and Skull Brew Coffee Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.